Prepare to witness the moment that changes everything. When the governor's cherished niece vanishes on the eve of vital peace talks, tensions skyrocket across the Dakota frontier. And determined to find her, officials suspect the worst, that hostile factions might be conspiring to dismantle a fragile accord. Suddenly, a legendary Sioux tracker appears, defying expectations and forging an unlikely alliance with those who once saw him as an enemy. Will they manage to rescue the governor's niece before looming chaos sparks all-out conflict? That's just the beginning of this riveting saga. To uncover the startling truth, follow the full story from its frantic search parties and hidden conspiracies to the final heart-stopping rescue. You'll see how compassion and cooperation can triumph over suspicion when the stakes are at their highest. If this kind of action and intrigue captivates you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to support our storytellers and enjoy more frontier adventures just like this. The Willow Bend Territory, 1878. A diplomatic gathering meant to ease tensions between settler communities and neighboring Sioux bands descended into chaos when Governor Horace Whitefield's beloved niece vanished on the eve of critical peace negotiations. Situated on the outskirts of the booming Bridgefield settlement, the governor's grand residence had been alive with the buzz of diplomats, tribal representatives, and powerful landowners. An uneasy hush lingered beneath the polite pleasantries, for violent skirmishes over disputed hunting grounds in the west had cast a shadow across the region. Governor Whitefield's final hope for reconciliation hinged on a meeting with Chief Running Hawk, head of a respected Sioux community. If they could strike a fair agreement, perhaps bloodshed might be averted. 17-year-old Aurelia Whitefield, newly arrived from the East Coast, wandered aimlessly through the lavish event. The dissonance between elegant dresses and the raw frontier environment unsettled her. Her uncle's ambition placed him at the heart of the territory's politics, and Aurelia had discovered that her own parents expected life out here to toughen their admittedly sheltered daughter. She found the grandeur of the frontier mansion at odds with the gritty realities of the land beyond the settlement's edge. Citizens whispered about looming conflicts. Rumors of raids stirred the air. By night's end, her head pounded with exhaustion and the seriousness of adult conversation. Hoping to escape the tension, Aurelia retired to her bedroom in the mansion's second floor, a room overlooking the rolling plains. She drifted off to fitful sleep, unaware that someone prowled in the darkness. Sometime after midnight, a gloved hand clamped over her mouth. She barely glimpsed the figure's masked face before her world went black. The next morning dawned gray and foreboding, as if reflecting the mansion's collective dread. Alarm erupted when Aurelia's bed was discovered empty. Governor Whitefield personally rushed to the settlement's small barracks where Marshal Burton Holcomb, a seasoned lawman with a weathered face, listened gravely. Together they roused a posse that combed the grounds beneath Aurelia's window, finding rope marks and large boot prints. A short distance away, two sets of horse tracks vanished into the riverbank, leaving only one conclusion: the governor's niece had been abducted. Tensions spiked. Many townsfolk looked toward the western horizon, suspecting a Sioux raid. Others muttered darkly about unscrupulous settlers. The timing could hardly be worse that same day. Chief Running Hawk was due in Bridgefield to sign an accord with Governor Whitefield, one that might ensure peaceful coexistence. If word spread that the governor's niece was missing, presumably at the Sioux's hands, settlers would clamoringly demand a military response. But evidence remained murky. A group of local trackers followed footprints that angled east, then abruptly disappeared in the fast-flowing waters of the winding Clay River. By sundown, hopes of a swift rescue had all but vanished. An unspoken realization gripped the settlement: if Aurelia were not found quickly, the entire peace process could collapse. While suspicion fell on both sides, few real clues pointed anywhere conclusive. As the second night rolled in and tempers flared, a lone rider arrived unexpectedly at the governor's gate. That rider was Night Arrow, a legendary Sioux tracker rumored to traverse the wild with uncanny skill. Most settlers knew him only by reputation. Half Sioux, half European trader's son, equally fluent in both worlds. Without fanfare, he offered a single sentence to the overwhelmed governor: "I can find her." A hush fell when Night Arrow stepped into Governor Whitefield's dimly lit study. The governor and Marshal Holcomb exchanged uncertain looks, well aware that a Sioux man in the seat of settler power might spark immediate distrust. Still, the desperate father figure in Whitefield overcame any hesitation. Sliding a glass of brandy across the desk, the governor quietly asked, "What do you need?" Night Arrow's dark eyes swept the room. He spoke in a measured tone, his English precise but marked by the faint cadence of another tongue. I need to see where she was taken, examine her room, and speak to anyone who heard or saw anything before dawn. Holcomb stifled a protest. Night Arrow was, after all, an outsider in the midst of the settlement's official inquiry, but Whitefield nodded. Follow me. They ascended the sweeping staircase to Aurelia's bedroom, the tension thick enough to taste. Night Arrow moved with quiet grace, studying the open window, the scuffs on the floor, and the subtle depressions along the sill. He crouched to pick up a nearly invisible fragment of blue fabric that Holcomb's men had overlooked. Might this be hers? Asked the marshal, frowning. The color didn't match Aurelia's nightdress. Night Arrow shook his head. Someone else's garment, he murmured, a partial clue. They wanted us to think she was dragged away by force, but these marks suggest she was handled with great care. Perhaps they need her alive for leverage. Downstairs, rumors flew. Joseph Braxton, a wealthy land speculator with an ambitious streak, stirred the crowd. It has to be the Sioux who took her. They want to sabotage these negotiations. Others pointed out that Chief Running Hawk had always advocated peace. Still, fear gnawed at them. As the rising sun spilled across the settlement, the arrival of the Sioux delegation loomed. Without Aurelia's safe return, the war drums might start beating on both sides. Night Arrow accompanied the governor and Marshal Holcomb on a frantic ride to the Clay River, where local trackers had lost the trail. They waded upstream to confuse us. One settler tracker declared, no telling which bank they climbed out on. But Night Arrow dismounted, stooped low, and ran his fingertips across flattened grass near the water's edge. He traced a faint line of disturbed reeds, then returned to his horse. They doubled back west, he said, quietly confident. A second set of tracks leads north into the pine groves. Doubt flickered in Holcomb's eyes, but Whitefield suppressed a flicker of hope. Then north we go, he commanded. News of a possible lead spread through Bridgefield. Joseph Braxton, whose hostility towards Sioux interests was well known, volunteered to help. I'll fetch my men, he told Holcomb, and will ride with you. And Night Arrow shook his head. Large groups trample the trail, make it harder to follow. 3 or 4 men at most. Reluctantly, the marshal sent the majority of volunteers back. That evening, the small party, Night Arrow Governor, Whitefield Marshal Holcomb, and 2 local trackers rode quietly north. The pine groves rose like silent sentinels, thick with shadows. Night Arrow paused often to read signs invisible to the others, a bent twig, a faint hoofprint in half-frozen mud. Twice they encountered campsite embers left by unknown travelers, but no conclusive evidence that Aurelia was near. At dawn on the second day, they discovered the remains of a camp along a secluded creek. Tattered footprints suggested multiple horses, including at least one with a distinctive chipped hoof. Holcomb recognized that pattern from older records describing a horse kept at Braxton's estate. A chill ran through the group. Could the conspirators be settlers themselves? The question hung unspoken as Night Arrow examined a single silver hairpin nestled in the grass. Aurelia's Whitefield's heart thundered, half relief, half dread. Back at Bridgefield settlement, tensions had reached a fever pitch. Whispers circulated that Chief Running Hawk's warriors had been spotted in the area, though none could verify the rumor. The chief himself arrived in the settlement on the appointed day, bringing a modest retinue of elders and younger warriors. He offered no fanfare, only solemn concern. I hear the governor's niece is missing, Running Hawk announced softly upon meeting Whitefield in the mansion's foyer. My people had nothing to do with this. We have been at our own sacred gathering since last moon. Word spread of the chief's pledge to help find the girl. While some settlers appreciated the gesture, others like Joseph Braxton dismissed it as a cunning move to deflect suspicion. Governor Whitefield was torn. He wanted to believe Running Hawk, but the abrupt disappearance of his niece threatened to unravel the fragile trust he had worked so hard to build. Late that evening, after more fruitless searching, he returned to a dimly lit conference room where Running Hawk waited patiently. They spoke in subdued voices, 2 leaders caught in the crossfire of a crisis that could plunge the territory into violence. Meanwhile, Night Arrow pressed forward with the investigation. Marshal Holcomb, initially skeptical of the Sioux trackers' methods, became increasingly reliant on them. At the Creekside camp, Night Arrow found evidence suggesting that more than 2 kidnappers were involved. Holcomb recalled how Aurelia's abduction had so carefully avoided detection, from the quiet infiltration of the mansion to the swift covering of tracks. This was no impulsive act, it was orchestrated. Another day of searching revealed a disturbing development. Along a forested ridge, the group stumbled upon abandoned tack and supplies, including rations that bore the label of Braxton's estate. Whitefield's face blanched. Could Joseph Braxton really be behind this? Holcomb, uneasy, recalled Braxton's vocal opposition to the peace accord and his rumored interest in exploiting local mines on disputed Sioux land. If the Sioux and settlers erupted into open conflict, Braxton's push for military intervention could open vast tracts of land for resource extraction. Night Arrow methodically gathered every clue. He insisted they return to Bridgefield under the cover of darkness to avoid tipping off the kidnappers that they were closing in. When they arrived at dusk, a faint glow still illuminated the windows of the local inn, and subdued conversation drifted from behind closed shutters. Word of the crisis had paralyzed the settlement. Doors stayed locked, and people prepared for the worst. Inside the mansion, tension weighed heavily. Chief Running Hawk's warriors had discreetly set up camp near the settlement's edge, offering to assist in the search. Some of Running Hawk's best trackers joined forces with Night Arrow to sweep the region for signs of Aurelia. But the kidnappers seemed always one step ahead, leaving false trails that might fool even experienced men. As the hours passed into another sleepless night, rumors of a hidden ransom note circulated. Though no such note had surfaced, Whitefield feared a political sabotage. If Aurelia remained lost, the blame would inevitably fall on the Sioux-fueling settler. Outraged and justifying a harsh crackdown, Holcomb's jaw tightened whenever he heard townspeople demanding vigilante justice. Whether or not the Sioux were involved, it was clear the kidnappers' ultimate goal was to derail the peace. The break came on the third evening following Aurelia's disappearance, when a settler scout came galloping into Bridgefield settlement, breathless and pale. "Governor Whitefield," he shouted at the mansion gate. "We found something you need to see urgently." Night Arrow and the marshal hurried outside to meet him under the flickering lamplight. The scout reported stumbling across a small makeshift cabin near the old mill, about 5 miles northeast, in an overgrown area seldom used since a flood 2 years prior. He described seeing 2 riders approach one of them wearing gear that matched Braxton's brand. Without delay, a small party assembled. Night Arrow, Holcomb, 2 of Running Hawk's warriors, and the scout set out into the moonlit night. Governor Whitefield, though desperate to join, was urged to remain behind to prepare for diplomatic fallout if the mission succeeded or failed. The track through the hills was tortuous with twisting gullies and dense stands of cedar. Night Arrow took the lead, his keen eyes scanning every bend, every snap of a branch. When at last they reached the old mill site, the moon had climbed high. They tethered their horses in a sheltered grove. In the distance, a faint light glimmered from a ramshackle cabin. Through a spyglass, Holcomb observed 2 figures walking near the front. One had the unmistakable silhouette of Joseph Braxton's broad shoulders. The other was masked, his features hidden. Night Arrow gestured for silence and began a cautious approach on foot, creeping through tall grass. The night was still punctuated only by the soft rustle of wind. If Aurelia was inside, they had no time to lose. Abruptly, a twig snapped. A watchman lurking by the side of the clearing caught sight of movement. He gave a sharp whistle of alarm, and the entire area lit up with gunfire. The trackers dropped low, returning shots from behind cover. Holcomb's heart pounded. This was no simple kidnapping force. These men moved with practiced discipline. Bullets whizzed overhead, sparking off rocks. Night Arrow signaled the group to split. He and one of Running Hawk's warriors flanked the cabin, while Holcomb and the scout provided covering fire. Inside the cabin, Aurelia cowered in a corner, bound at the wrist but otherwise unharmed. She heard the uproar outside and mustered the last of her courage. If the cavalry had arrived, she needed to help. Summoning her adrenaline, she wriggled free enough to loosen the rope from a rusty nail on the floor. Braxton's muffled cursing reached her ears as he barked commands to the masked men about cutting off their attackers' escape. Then Joseph Braxton stormed through the cabin door, face livid. "We're compromised," he snarled at the masked companion. "We can't risk them taking the girl." Aurelia's blood turned to ice. Was he planning to kill her? The masked man raised a pistol toward Aurelia, but his hesitation was clear. Perhaps he hadn't signed on for murder. Braxton grabbed the weapon from him in frustration, but before he could pull the trigger, a thunderous crash split the Night Arrow, and the Sioux warrior burst through a rear window in a hail of splintering wood. Aurelia dove to the floor as gunfire rattled the cabin walls. The masked man retreated in panic while Braxton fired wildly. A bullet clipped the Sioux warrior's arm, causing him to stumble. Night Arrow lunged forward, knocking Braxton's pistol aside with a deft strike. Holcomb and the scout rushed in from the front door. Within moments, the entire cabin was secured. Joseph Braxton lay pinned beneath Night Arrow's knee, fury etched in every line of his face. Aurelia trembled as Holcomb cut her to bonds, relief mingling with sheer disbelief at her rescue. In the lantern light, she could see Joseph Braxton's eyes dark with hatred. Night Arrow and the Sioux warrior exchanged glances of concern. The masked accomplice had fled into the darkness. Outside, two more gunmen lay unconscious or wounded, subdued by the well-coordinated assault. Braxton's kidnapping ring intended to spark chaos and sabotage the negotiations was abruptly exposed. All this time you wanted the Sioux blamed. Holcomb growled, hauling Braxton upright. You risked a young girl's life to derail peace. Braxton spat at the ground. Your so-called peace would rob the territory of its potential. The land belongs to us settlers, not to superstitious tribes or spineless governors. Night Arrow spoke quietly to Aurelia. Are you hurt? She shook her head, tears welling up as she regained her composure. Just shaken. Thank you. In that moment, she realized how precarious her life had been and how crucial the presence of this half-Sioux tracker had been to saving her. The irony, someone from a community so often demonized had rescued her from an unthinkable fate orchestrated by her own people. Securing Braxton and his men for transport, the rescue team prepared to return to Bridgefield settlement. They worried about the masked man's escape, but took consolation that the mastermind behind the conspiracy was in custody. Aurelia rode with Holcomb, her wrists still sore but her spirit unbroken. Night Arrow led the way, ensuring their path home was hidden from any of Braxton's stray associates who might lurk nearby. At dawn, the unlikely procession reached the outskirts of the settlement. Word spread like wildfire. Aurelia Whitefield was safe, and Joseph Braxton was the true culprit. Shockwaves rippled through the settlement. Those who had been quick to blame the Sioux grappled with the revelation that a prominent settler and land speculator had orchestrated the kidnapping. Anger flared, but also a measure of relief. If war had erupted prematurely, countless lives could have been lost. Within hours, Joseph Braxton and his wounded associates were behind bars. Marshal Holcomb, still reeling, spent the morning questioning them. Braxton remained defiant, insisting his actions were justified to protect settler dominance. The masked accomplice, still at large, haunted Holcomb's thoughts. But at least the immediate threat to Aurelia was resolved. Meanwhile, the Sioux warrior who had taken a bullet to the arm received treatment from the settlement's doc, the same man who had once refused to treat natives. Seeing the warrior's injury and bravery in saving the governor's niece prompted a change of heart. Bridging one more gap, later that day, Aurelia was reunited with Governor Whitefield. Their tearful embrace on the governor's mansion steps became the moment every witness would remember. Night Arrow stood to one side, expression unreadable, while Chief Running Hawk and his delegation looked on from a discreet distance. An undercurrent of both relief and tension emanated from the crowd. The immediate crisis had passed, but the next steps would determine whether this newly averted tragedy could become a catalyst for unity instead of conflict. Against the hush of onlookers, Governor Whitefield approached Night Arrow and Chief Running Hawk, offering a handshake that symbolized gratitude and respect. My niece owes you her life, he said huskily, and our territory owes you a debt. Night Arrow merely nodded while Running Hawk spoke for the Sioux. We are glad to prevent needless violence. Peace serves us all. The crowd stirred. There were murmurs of acceptance and pockets of skepticism. That single moment on the mansion's porch laid bare the fragile future of the Willow Bend territory. 2 days later, a special council convened at the newly renovated town hall in Bridgefield settlement. The once hostile environment now hummed with cautious optimism, for Aurelia's rescue had cast a stark light on who truly threatened peace. The council included Governor Whitefield, Chief Running Hawk, several Sioux elders, and influential settlers from around the region. Marshal Holcomb, exhausted from interrogations and security preparations, stood guard near the hall's entrance. Night Arrow maintained a quiet presence in a corner, arms folded, eyes ever watchful. The tension was palpable when the meeting began. Some settlers who had previously backed Joseph Braxton's expansionist rhetoric now found themselves without a spokesperson. Others who had blamed the Sioux for Aurelia's disappearance struggled to reconcile the truth. Governor Whitefield spoke first, revealing with clarity how Braxton had planned to use Aurelia's kidnapping to provoke distrust and an inevitable military crackdown on the Sioux. Holcomb then presented physical evidence seized from Braxton's men, including forged ransom notes meant to implicate tribal involvement. Gasps filled the room as the scope of the plot became undeniable. Aurelia bravely stood and described how Braxton's accomplices had torn her from her bed and ferried her through the darkness. She recounted overhearing them speak about fanning the flames of a settler versus Sioux conflict. Her voice trembled when she spoke of the terror she felt bound in a cabin, awaiting a fate she scarcely dared imagine. Yet she credited Night Arrow and the Sioux warrior for risking their lives to rescue her. I am living proof, she said softly, that the Sioux aren't our enemies. We must look beyond the surface of our fears. Eyes turned to Chief Running Hawk. the recognized voice of the Sioux band. He addressed the council in steady, measured tones. Our people wish to preserve the land that has sustained us for generations. We do not seek to drive you away or harm your families. But men like Braxton, who crave power and profit, would see us pitted against each other. We do not wish to bring war. We wish to prevent it. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I ask you to see us not as a threat, but as partners in ensuring peace. Murmurs of agreement filtered through the hall. Even a handful of settlers who had clung to suspicion found themselves reconsidering. The evidence was overwhelming. Braxton's manipulations could have sparked ruinous conflict. Governor Whitefield proposed reaffirming the earlier draft accord with expanded oversight for shared hunting grounds, ensuring that unscrupulous investors couldn't exploit the land for personal gain. Marshal Holcomb added that local law enforcement would collaborate with select Sioux trackers to prevent further sabotage. His glance flicked toward Night Arrow, who met it with a slight nod. The motion passed with a strong majority. Bridgefield, it seemed, had avoided a catastrophe and emerged with a renewed commitment to interdependence. On the surface, it appeared that the territory was finally ready to heal old wounds. Still, many recognized that open distrust could linger. As the meeting adjourned, Aurelia saw that more needed to be done to bind these two communities closer together. She approached Chief Running Hawk with a respectful bow, saying quietly, I want to learn more about your people, your ways. If we are to move forward, we need deeper understanding. Night Arrow overheard his stoic demeanor, softening almost imperceptibly. For centuries, settlers and Sioux had spoken past each other, entangled in prejudice and ignorance. Perhaps Aurelia's earnest willingness to see beyond the stereotypes could signal a turning point. Outside, the sun shone brightly on a territory that, for a brief moment, had felt filled with possibility. Joseph Braxton's trial took place swiftly, given the gravity of his crimes. 2 weeks later, the improvised courtroom in Bridgefield overflowed with spectators, including traveling merchants, curious farmers, and Sioux envoys invited to observe the proceedings. Governor Whitefield, though not presiding, watched intently from the front row, a pale Aurelia by his side. Marshal Holcomb presented damning evidence, ransom letters aimed at framing the Sioux, detailed notes on how to sabotage the peace process, and the testimonies of Braxton's wounded accomplices. Throughout the trial, Braxton maintained an air of defiance. He declared that God-given rights entitled settlers to the land, and that anyone, be they Sioux or settler, who advocated compromise was a traitor. His brazen attitude only inflamed the jury's condemnation. Night Arrow testified briefly about discovering Braxton at the cabin, Aurelia bound in the corner. He described the fight and the bullet that grazed his Sioux comrade's arm. Despite Braxton's lawyer grasping at straws to paint Night Arrow as biased, the evidence against Braxton was ironclad. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of conspiracy, kidnapping, and incitement. Sentenced to a lengthy term in territorial prison, Braxton departed the makeshift courtroom in chains, shouting dark warnings about the territory's future. A hush followed his exit, as though the entire settlement exhaled in relief. Outside, a small group of Sierra mining representatives huddled uneasily. Braxton's downfall had implications for their own land deals. The Sioux watchers, including Running Hawk, noted the tension. They understood that while a dangerous agitator was gone, others might eventually fill the vacuum. In the aftermath, Aurelia and Governor Whitefield embraced openly, tears in their eyes. The governor thanked the community for supporting justice over hysteria. He then turned his attention to the Sioux delegation. I hope this demonstrates our genuine commitment to fairness, he said. Chief Running Hawk simply nodded. Justice is a deed, not just a word. Today, your people showed that truth prevails. Back at the mansion, Aurelia found herself restless. Though the immediate crisis was resolved, her mind replayed the kidnapping's vivid moments. The cabin's dank smell, the rope biting her wrists, the masked faces. Above all, she remembered Night Arrow bursting through the window, risking his life to save her. Beyond the physical rescue, Aurelia's perspective on the Sioux had transformed. She realized that the real threats came from those driven by greed and hatred, not from an entire culture unfairly labeled as the enemy. Amid these reflections, she discovered a small gathering forming behind the mansion. Chief Running Hawk, Running Hawk's advisors, Night Arrow, and a handful of townsfolk had assembled around a modest bonfire. They spoke softly, exchanging stories of hunts, the region's animals, and the changing seasons. Marshal Holcomb stood quietly to one side, arms folded. Listening, Aurelia approached tentatively, unsure if she was welcome, but Night Arrow beckoned her over. One of the Sioux elders pointed at the star-filled sky, explaining their people's ancient stories about the constellations. Aurelia leaned forward, mesmerized. She had never encountered such a perspective, one that treated the sky as more than a neutral void, but as a tapestry of legends and lessons. The talk turned to the land's delicate balance, how buffalo herds once roamed free, how the Clay River's floods could nurture or devastate. The settlers added their own tales describing eastern railroads and the promise of connecting these plains to distant cities. By evening's end, that informal fireside chat had accomplished more than any official meeting. People from backgrounds, once divided by fear, discovered a shared awe for the earth beneath their feet and the heavens above. Aurelia quietly resolved to continue this bridge building. She watched as Night Arrow disappeared into the night shadows, heading back to his campsite on the settlement's outskirts. In a territory still bracing for future storms, fleeting moments of unity felt like fragile miracles. With Braxton imprisoned, peace negotiations resumed in earnest. Bridgefield's streets felt oddly calm. Over the next month, small committees formed, one to establish guidelines for hunting, another to address property claims, and still another for water rights. Each committee included both settlers and Sioux, a novelty that sparked curiosity and sometimes grumbling. But the tangible progress was undeniable. Fewer disputes were reported each week, and trade in furs, produce, and handmade goods flourished at the weekly market. Aurelia found herself playing an unofficial ambassadorial role. Governor Whitefield, proud yet cautious, tasked his niece with improving cultural exchanges. She visited Chief Running Hawk's main camp, located a half-day ride west along the Clay River. Accompanied by Marshal Holcomb, and an aide, she spent several days there learning about Sioux traditions, from cooking with wild herbs to understanding the significance of ceremonial dances. She found her preconceived notions unraveling. The people's hospitality and humor charmed her. Night Arrow proved a discreet but vital guide in bridging these worlds. He explained that not all Sioux leaders admired the settlement's swift expansion. Some younger warriors distrusted the sudden shift. They remembered broken treaties and forced relocations. Words alone won't erase history, Night Arrow told Aurelia as they walked along the riverbank, scanning for signs of game actions matter. If your uncle's government can demonstrate consistency, the wounds might begin to heal. By day's end, Aurelia felt hopeful. She recognized that a new generation of settlers like herself could champion respect over conquest. Night Arrow listened quietly, occasionally offering a wry smile as she chatted about how the East Coast newspapers portrayed frontier life. They conjure images of savage battles and untamed wilderness, she noted. They have no idea how nuanced this place truly is. Night Arrow merely nodded. The land in his eyes remained majestic but fragile. Marshal Holcomb, once suspicious of Night Arrow, came to rely on him for patrols through contested valleys. Their collaboration reduced raider attacks and prevented minor disputes from escalating. The arrangement benefited both sides, though not everyone embraced it. Among the settlers, a few diehards still grumbled that having a Sioux man act as a de facto deputy was an insult to real Americans. And among the Sioux, certain elders warned that aligning too closely with Whitefield's government might yield regrets if official policies changed. But for the moment, the partnership stood strong. The real test arrived in late spring when a new wave of eastern migrants poured into Bridgefield, lured by rumors of farmland and opportunity. Many were open-minded, but some arrived with prejudices fully formed. One heated incident flared when a farmer refused to pay fair wages to Sioux laborers helping him clear fields. Word spread fast, and anger threatened to spill over into violence. Aurelia and Night Arrow rode out to mediate with Running Hawk, eventually stepping in to find a solution. They successfully diffused the standoff, reminding everyone that the territory's newfound peace was fragile and required all sides to uphold fairness. As the weeks passed, Aurelia's time spent among the Sioux profoundly shaped her worldview. She recognized that she, like Night Arrow, stood at the intersection of worlds once considered irreconcilable, and in that intersection, she saw potential for greater unity. Letters home to her parents spoke of transformation. I no longer pine for Boston. The frontier is uncertain, but it brims with possibility. I feel I have a role here. Bridging hearts before conflict again rears its head. 6 months after the kidnapping, Bridgefield settlement prepared for a grand convening of territorial officials. News had reached eastern newspapers that the Willowbend Territory was experimenting with a novel approach to settler-native relations. The press loved the story, a villainous land baron scheme uncovered by a Sioux tracker, a rescued governor's niece forging cross-cultural ties, and a potential blueprint for peaceful coexistence on the frontier. This attention invited an influx of visitors, investors, and the curious Governor Whitefield, mindful of the intense scrutiny, planned a public renewal of the peace accord with Chief Running Hawk. Aurelia helped with the logistics, feeling both pride and apprehension. In front of all these witnesses, we can show it's more than words, she assured her uncle, who looked exhausted by the preparations. But we must also be ready for opportunists. He nodded grimly, remembering Braxton's betrayal and the masked accomplice still at large. On the day of the ceremony, a makeshift stage was erected near the settlement's central square. American flags fluttered alongside Sioux symbols. A large crowd gathered, including traveling merchants, scouts, journalists, and curious bystanders. Night Arrow stood with a small group of Sioux warriors at one edge of the platform. Marshal Holcomb oversaw security, scanning the throng for any sign of trouble. Chief Running Hawk arrived on horseback, dismounting with regal calm, while Aurelia greeted him warmly. Governor Whitefield addressed the assembly. We gather to prove that unity is possible, that the promise of this territory lies not in conquest, but in cooperation. Applause rippled through the crowd. Chief Running Hawk spoke next in the Sioux language, and a translator conveyed his words in English. For too many years we met in battle. Today we stand side by side, working to preserve the land for generations yet unborn. Near the back, Aurelia spotted a tall figure wearing a broad hat. Something about his posture triggered a memory. She stepped off the stage, weaving through onlookers, trying not to lose sight of him. When she circled around, the figure was gone, leaving only footprints in the dust. A knot of unease twisted in her stomach. Was it the masked man who escaped at the cabin? Suddenly, shouts erupted from the far side of the crowd. Aurelia rushed forward, finding two men scuffling, one brandishing a pistol. Marshal Holcomb tackled him to the ground, and the weapon discharged harmlessly into the sky. The gunman cursed violently in half-drunken rage, apparently outraged at bowing to natives. The scene nearly unraveled the ceremony, but Holcomb subdued him swiftly, and the tension settled. Night Arrow approached Aurelia, who was catching her breath. You're right to worry, he said quietly. There are still those who will do anything to sabotage this. Up on the stage, Governor Whitefield resumed his speech. The minor uproar settled. He invited Chief Running Hawk to finalize a new treaty that reinforced land-sharing stipulations and established a joint rangers patrol. Night Arrow, at Whitefield's request, was declared lead tracker of the territorial rangers, formalizing his crucial role. Applause followed. A wave of reporters captured the moment, scribbling notes and describing the historic handshake between Whitefield and Running Hawk. Despite the outward optimism, Aurelia continued to scan the periphery. She recalled Joseph Braxton's final words about the territory never accepting peace. Yet for now, at least the ceremony ended on a triumphant note. The delegates marched off to the governor's mansion for a celebratory banquet. As the crowd dispersed, Aurelia exchanged a relieved smile with Night Arrow. One chapter closed, but the future still held uncertainties. For the Willow Bend territory, forging peace might be an unending journey of vigilance, courage, and empathy. In the days following the ceremony, life in Willow Bend territory assumed a near-normal rhythm, if such a thing existed on the ever-shifting frontier. Newly arrived farmers and ranchers sought advice from Sioux farmers who knew the land's cycles. The Clay River, shimmering under spring sunshine, became a shared lifeline. Each month, joint ranger patrols led by Night Arrow crisscrossed the territory, mediating small disputes and reminding outlaws that the era of easy chaos was over. Meanwhile, Aurelia discovered a personal calling, writing about the territory's progress for Eastern newspapers, shaping a counter-narrative to the usual gloom and doom tales of frontier violence. But not all was calm. Rumors persisted of a masked figure, Braxton's former accomplice, moving quietly through back roads, whispering rebellious sentiments to those frustrated by the new peace. Occasional sabotage attempts on communal projects added fuel to the rumor that a shadowy faction wanted the accord to fail. No direct confrontations occurred. Yet the threats simmered beneath the surface. Marshal Holcomb quietly expanded watch lists, ensuring that Bridgefield stayed one step ahead of malcontents. Aurelia's personal growth mirrored that of the territory. Once meek and frightened, she now rode confidently, carrying the revolver Holcomb had insisted she learn to use properly. She spent days at the Sioux encampments, building relationships. She admired the intricacies of their daily life, crafts that wove the tribe's stories into geometric patterns, ceremonies that honored the land's cycles. At night, she'd often linger by a shared fire with Night Arrow, listening as he recounted old legends about thunder spirits and sacred hills. Their conversations veered from the cosmic to the personal, forming an easy companionship that defied cultural boundaries. Governor Whitefield, observing his niece's expanding role, occasionally worried about the challenges she faced. He also recognized that she possessed a fortitude shaped by her near brush with disaster. Sometimes they would sit together in his study, the lamplight flickering over territorial maps. She'd share updates on Sioux concerns like the overhunting of bison by new settlers, and he'd confide the pressure he felt from Eastern financiers eager to develop the land. They agreed that forging real peace required patience, compromise, and an iron will to guard against sabotage. Thus, it was no surprise when, after months of reflection, Aurelia announced her intention to remain in Willow Bend long-term. Her parents in Boston had written multiple letters urging her to return to refined society, yet she penned her heartfelt reply, explaining that her place was here, helping shape a new social tapestry alongside people she had come to respect. The East might scoff at her decision, but her father's occasional line, "Find your own frontier," echoed in her mind. She realized she had done just that. Night Arrow continued leading joint patrols, venturing farther from Bridgefield, tracking bandits and rogue hunting parties. His reputation as a fearless and fair-minded tracker solidified. Old prejudice softened under the tangible results he delivered. A gambler-turned-horse thief was captured without bloodshed. A quarrel over grazing rights was peacefully settled. Gradually, even the most stubborn settlers grudgingly admitted his worth. Chief Running Hawk noted with satisfaction that in bridging two worlds, Night Arrow embodied a synergy few had imagined possible. Finally, on a crisp early summer evening, after attending a celebratory feast honoring the first full season of the peace accord, Aurelia and Night Arrow found themselves alone on the governor's mansion porch. Lanterns glowed, and from inside drifted the sound of lively fiddle music. Across the yard, people gathered in small clusters, talking and laughing. Aurelia studied the horizon where the sun had just dipped below rolling hills. The air felt alive with promise. "I used to think this land was unforgiving," she said quietly. "But maybe it was just waiting for us to learn how to live in harmony." Night Arrow nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant tree line. "Every place has its spirit. Some learn to respect it, others try to conquer it." Their eyes met. The memory of Aurelia's kidnapping felt like a distant echo in the presence of the robust peace that had blossomed since. Yet they both knew the seeds of discord still lurked, requiring vigilance. They didn't speak of the masked accomplice or any lurking threats that might unravel this fragile alliance. Instead, they allowed themselves a moment of gratitude. For a territory on the brink of war, redemption had emerged from courage and unlikely unity. With the star-studded sky above them and a new dawn ever on the horizon, Aurelia Whitefield and Night Arrow stood side by side, mindful that their story was only beginning on one where the harsh lines between settler and Sioux blurred into a shared path toward a better tomorrow. Reflecting on it all, from a nighttime kidnapping that nearly ignited a devastating war to the determined Sioux tracker who stepped forward in a moment of desperation, it's clear that adversity can forge unbreakable bonds. A territory once poised for bloodshed discovered a path to peace through empathy, bravery, and mutual respect. The governor's niece, snatched away under moonlight, ultimately became a symbol of unity rather than discord, demonstrating how even the direst circumstances can sow seeds of hope. As for me, this tale reaffirms my belief that true strength lies in understanding one another's struggles and working together in spite of them. No boundary is too great, no difference too wide when hearts are set on a shared future. What do you think? Please share your reflections and suggestions in the comments. We'd love to continue the conversation. And remember, if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss any upcoming stories that celebrate courage and unity against all odds.